Imagine being trapped 35,000 feet above the ground in a pressure cooker of racial tension, where one moment could change everything. This isn't just another airline story, this is a real-life drama that exposes the raw, unfiltered truth about racism, power, and personal dignity in modern America. What happens when a privileged corporate executive decides to challenge a teenage student's right to exist in a space she believes belongs exclusively to her? When silent witnesses become unexpected heroes? When a single text message could trigger a chain reaction that would expose the darkest corners of institutional prejudice? This is a story that will make you question everything you thought you knew about respect, boundaries, and the unspoken rules that govern our society. A narrative so intense, so provocative, that it will leave you breathless, angry, and ultimately hopeful. Viewers, we want to hear from you. Drop a comment below. Where are you watching from? Share your own experiences with unexpected confrontations like this video. If it moved you, share to spread awareness, subscribe and hit the notification bell to join our community of truth seekers. Your voice matters. Your story matters. Let's start a conversation. It was a crisp morning at Los Angeles International Airport, where the sun cast long shadows over the gleaming Boeing 787 Dreamliner parked at the gate. The first-class cabin, a sanctuary of luxury, was filled with well-dressed professionals and travelers eager to make their way to New York City. Among them was Amanda Harrison, a 42-year-old corporate consultant from Boston. With every step she took, her tailored navy blue suit and designer leather briefcase broadcasted her status. As a seasoned business traveler, Amanda was no stranger to the refined world of first-class cabins, where luxury was a given and waiting was a thing of the past. However, on this flight, Amanda was not prepared for the confrontation that awaited her. She had been looking forward to the calm and serenity that came with sitting in the coveted seat 3A. This seat, the one at the very front of the first-class cabin, was always the first choice for Amanda when booking her flights. She was used to having things go according to plan, so when she boarded the flight and headed toward seat 3A, the last thing she expected to find was a teenager already seated in her place. Sophia Williams, the 16-year-old girl, was calm and composed, her neat, crisp white button-down shirt and dark jeans making her appear professional and well put together for someone her age. At first glance, Amanda assumed this was just another young traveler unaware of the space they were occupying. But when she saw that the teenager wasn't budging, the sense of entitlement that came with her corporate background kicked in. "Excuse me," Amanda said, her voice sharp and commanding as she stopped in front of the young girl. Her tone carried no warmth, only the firm certainty that she was entitled to the space. "I believe you're in my seat." Sophia looked up, her expression calm, her eyes meeting Amanda's gaze without flinching. Sophia wasn't fazed, despite the force of Amanda's words. She responded with poise, showing the boarding pass clearly matching the seat number. "I apologize," Sophia said politely, her voice smooth but firm. "But this is my assigned seat." The words stung Amanda more than she was willing to admit. She had paid extra for this seat, had specifically chosen it weeks ago, and now a young girl, no older than a high school student, was sitting in it. It felt like an affront to Amanda's carefully curated world of privilege. Amanda's grip on her boarding pass tightened, her perfectly manicured fingers clutching it like a weapon. Her irritation mounted as Sophia remained seated. Amanda took a deep breath, trying to hold on to some semblance of composure, but the judgment in her eyes was palpable as she leaned in closer, the sharp scent of her expensive Chanel perfume mixing with the tension in the air. "I don't think you understand," Amanda said, her voice rising slightly in volume. "This is a first-class seat, and you clearly don't belong here." There it was, the implicit racism that hung in the air like smoke, thin but suffocating. Sophia, however, didn't rise to the bait. She simply remained seated, her posture confident yet relaxed, as though she had dealt with this kind of situation countless times before. "Ma'am," Sophia replied, her voice steady, "I have a valid boarding pass for this seat. If there's a concern, I suggest speaking with a flight attendant who can verify my reservation." Amanda's face flushed, but she refused to back down. She had spent years climbing the corporate ladder, and she wasn't going to let a teenager, especially one who didn't seem to understand the rules of the world she lived in, challenge her authority. A few passengers had begun to notice the escalating tension. Some exchanged uncertain glances, while others tried to remain absorbed in their own little worlds. Amanda could feel the weight of their attention now on her. Sophia, however, sat unmoved by the growing spectacle. As the confrontation continued, the quiet hum of the first-class cabin seemed to grow louder. What was initially a small disagreement about a seat had blossomed into a full-fledged drama. Amanda's frustration simmered beneath the surface, and she found herself becoming more aggressive. She wasn't just asking to sit in her seat anymore, this had become a matter of pride, and she would not be denied. "Do you even understand how first class works?" she demanded, her tone dripping with condescension. "These seats cost thousands of dollars. They're not for students." There was an audible shift in the air. Sophia's eyes remained calm, but now there was an unmistakable edge in the way she spoke. "I'm sorry if there's been some confusion," Sophia said, her voice still even, "but my ticket says this is my seat. I'm not going to move, and I don't think there's any reason for me to." This simple statement set Amanda off in ways she didn't even fully understand. In her mind, she was entitled to the seat because of her job, her status, the money she had paid, the life she had built. Sophia, on the other hand, was a teenager, dressed simply, with her worn-out backpack and humble demeanor. What could she possibly know about the value of this seat? But Sophia wasn't backing down. And that only seemed to infuriate Amanda more. "I don't think you know who you're talking to," Amanda sneered, her words slipping from her mouth like venom. "I have a lot more important things to do than deal with some teenager who doesn't belong in a seat like this." The words hung in the air, thick with the unspoken tension of prejudice. Sophia didn't flinch, didn't even blink, but there was a slight tightening of her grip on her phone, and her fingers began typing a quick message. Amanda hadn't noticed, but the phone buzzed in Sophia's hands. The simple message to her father, a senior FBI counterterrorism agent, was already on its way. "Dad, I'm experiencing a situation on the flight. Potential harassment." It was subtle, but it was also a clear indication that Sophia wasn't going to allow this injustice to slide unnoticed. Amanda, however, was too wrapped up in her own frustration to realize that this moment was going to be the spark that would ignite a much bigger confrontation. One of the passengers, an older man with graying hair and a thick tweed jacket, glanced up briefly, his eyes narrowing at the scene unfolding in front of him. He had seen enough in his time to recognize a power dynamic when he saw one. But despite his apparent sympathy, he said nothing. It wasn't until Amanda's voice rose even further, demanding to speak with the chief flight attendant, that the situation escalated. Sophia remained seated, and the other passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A young flight attendant, Jason Martinez, appeared at the scene. His expression was neutral, his tone professionally neutral, though there was an underlying tension in his voice as he addressed Amanda. "Is there a problem here?" he asked. Amanda turned to him, her handbag swinging wildly as she gestured toward Sophia. "Yes, there is. This girl is sitting in my seat, and she needs to be removed immediately." Sophia remained calm, glancing up at Jason briefly before returning her gaze to Amanda. "I don't think there's any need for anyone to be removed," Sophia said, her voice still calm. "I have a valid boarding pass for this seat. If you'd like to verify, you can speak with the gate agent or another flight attendant." Jason looked from Amanda to Sophia, sensing the tension in the air. He had seen confrontations before, but something about this one felt different. The racial undertones of the situation were clear, though unspoken. He knew he had to handle it carefully, not wanting to make things worse but not willing to let the situation escalate further. Amanda's glare bore into him as she demanded again, "I paid for this seat. Why is she sitting here?" Jason held his ground, his voice steady. "I'll check your reservation, ma'am, and we'll get this sorted out." As Jason walked away, Sophia discreetly checked her phone. She could feel the weight of the moment settling in. What had started as a simple flight was quickly turning into a confrontation that was exposing deep-seated issues of privilege and racial tension. But Sophia was determined to maintain her composure. This wasn't just about a seat, it was about a young black girl being told, in no uncertain terms, that she didn't belong. It was a moment that demanded more than just patience. It required strength. Amanda, on the other hand, was about to realize that the situation had spiraled far beyond her control. And as the flight attendants began to intervene, the passengers, too, began to recognize that they were witnessing a much bigger conflict unfold before their eyes. The Boeing 787 Dreamliner, glistening under the morning sun, was the perfect embodiment of modern air travel. As passengers filed through the cabin, the quiet hum of anticipation filled the air. Most of the travelers, business professionals, vacationers, and families, made their way to their assigned seats, minding their own business. But not Amanda Harrison. Her calm and collected exterior was masking a growing storm. Amanda had been a frequent flyer for years. As a seasoned corporate consultant, she knew exactly how the first-class cabin should feel: spacious, serene, and filled with individuals who understood the unwritten rules of such an exclusive space. Her custom-tailored suit, perfectly styled hair, and expensive accessories signaled her elevated status. She had earned this luxury, after all. But when she reached seat 3A, the irritation set in. There was a young African-American girl already sitting in the seat. The girl, who appeared to be no older than 16, was dressed in a simple white button-down shirt and dark jeans. She was unremarkable in appearance, and yet there she was, in Amanda's seat. This was not just a minor inconvenience, it felt like an affront to everything Amanda believed she was entitled to. She had paid extra for this premium seat, carefully selecting it for its proximity to the front of the cabin. To have it taken from her by a stranger was unacceptable. Amanda's grip on her boarding pass tightened as she walked up to the teenager. Her approach was swift, her gaze icy. She addressed the young girl without a trace of hesitation. "Excuse me, I believe you're in my seat." The teenager, looking up, met Amanda's gaze with calm, composed eyes. She was unflustered, a stark contrast to Amanda's growing irritation. The girl's voice, when she spoke, was polite, and her words were measured. "I'm sorry, but this is my assigned seat. My boarding pass matches the number." Amanda's irritation flared into something more intense, more possessive. "No, I don't think you understand," she snapped, her tone sharpening as she took a step closer to the teenager. "This is first class. This seat is reserved for people who belong here, not people like you." The weight of those last words hung in the air, thick with unspoken meaning. It wasn't just a seat she was claiming, it was an assertion of privilege, a belief that some people simply didn't belong in spaces she deemed exclusive. The teenager, who introduced herself as Sophia Williams, didn't flinch. She remained seated, her back straight, her eyes never leaving Amanda's. She could feel the tension crackling between them, but she knew better than to engage in a battle of words. She had been taught to rise above such petty confrontations, to handle these moments with grace and dignity. "I'm sorry, ma'am," Sophia said again, maintaining her composure. "I have a valid boarding pass. If you'd like, we can speak with the flight attendant." But Amanda wasn't having it. She took another step closer, her voice rising in pitch. "No, this is unacceptable," she said sharply. "I paid extra for this seat, and you're clearly not supposed to be here. You need to move." The passengers around them began to notice the exchange. Some glanced up from their books or phones, sensing that this confrontation was escalating into something more than just a seating dispute. The atmosphere shifted, and what was once a space of relative peace became tense, charged with the kind of discomfort that accompanies a disagreement about social order. Sophia remained calm. She knew what was happening. She had dealt with microaggressions before, had been dismissed in classrooms, overlooked in academic competitions, and subtly belittled in various social settings. But this was different. The overt hostility Amanda exhibited was new, and she wasn't going to let it derail her. She reached for her phone and discreetly began typing a message. "Dad, I'm having an issue on the flight. Someone's refusing to accept my seat assignment. Potential harassment." Sophia knew her father, Michael Williams, an FBI counterterrorism agent, would want to know immediately. Despite the physical distance between them, he was on a different flight, his protective instincts would immediately be triggered. Meanwhile, Amanda stood over Sophia, her impatience mounting. "Do you even know how much I paid for this seat?" she demanded, her tone dripping with contempt. "This seat is for people who belong in first class, not for students." Sophia's hand tightened around her phone as she finished typing the message. She didn't let Amanda's words affect her, but inside, a quiet fire burned. She had worked hard to be here, to earn her spot on this plane, just as Amanda had. The only difference was that Amanda's sense of entitlement came from privilege, Sophia's came from her ability to rise above challenges. As the two continued to stand there, the tension in the air became palpable. Some of the passengers, uncomfortable with the growing conflict, shifted in their seats. Others pulled out their phones and began recording, sensing that this moment, for better or worse, was about to become something bigger than just a seat dispute. Amanda's next words were dripping with disdain. "You don't belong here," she said, her voice full of venom. "People like you don't understand how these things work." Sophia's heart raced, but her expression remained unchanged. She was calm, but inwardly, she knew the implications of Amanda's words. This wasn't about the seat. This was about something much deeper. Something insidious that Amanda may not even fully realize. It was about race, privilege, and the social boundaries that governed where people like Sophia were allowed to exist. As the confrontation reached its peak, the flight attendants began to take notice. Jason Martinez, a young male flight attendant, approached with a neutral expression. He asked, his voice calm, "Is there a problem here?" Amanda spun around to face him, her eyes flashing with indignation. "Yes. This girl is sitting in my seat, and she needs to be moved immediately." Sophia didn't flinch. Her fingers hovered over the screen of her phone, typing quickly. "Dad, it's getting worse. They're threatening to have me removed." Sophia's father, Michael, was already on alert. As soon as he received the message, he began working the channels he knew best, gathering information on the situation. Despite the physical distance between them, Michael's professional training in handling high-stakes situations gave him the tools to act quickly. His daughter's well-being was his top priority, and he would do everything in his power to protect her, even from a distance. Jason, having been briefed by other passengers and the situation at hand, remained neutral but firm. "Let's all calm down," he said. "We can get this sorted without any issues." But Amanda wasn't calm. She was beside herself now, her frustration peaking. She demanded again that Sophia be moved. "I'm not asking," she said. "I'm telling you. Move her. Now." Sophia, still holding her phone tightly in her hand, finally looked up at Amanda. The calm in her eyes was disarming. "I'm not moving," she said quietly. "This is my seat, and I'm not going anywhere." And in that moment, the flight attendants recognized the tension that had been simmering below the surface. Jason knew this was more than just an issue of seating, it was about race, power, and privilege. He could feel it in the air, and he knew it wasn't going to be resolved with simple words. The atmosphere in the cabin shifted again. This was no longer just about a teenage girl sitting in a seat. It was about a fight for respect, for dignity, and for equality in a space that was supposed to be shared by all. And as the scene unfolded, the flight attendants began to realize that the flight was about to take a very different turn, one that would expose the deeper divides in society. The confrontation had become a microcosm of the racial tension, privilege, and prejudice that had been simmering just below the surface in modern America. Sophia remained calm, even as her fingers typed furiously on her phone, sending a message to her father. Amanda, on the other hand, felt her authority slipping. The seat dispute had become something far larger, and she was on the losing side. As Jason returned to check in with the flight crew, the passengers around them whispered in low voices, discussing what was happening. Phones were already out, recording everything. Sophia's message was simple: stay calm. I'm handling this. I'll be okay. She was already in control of the situation in ways Amanda couldn't even comprehend. The cabin remained charged with tension as the confrontation between Amanda and Sophia reached its boiling point. What began as a minor seating issue had now evolved into a stark display of privilege, power, and racial tension. Passengers who had once been passive bystanders now watched with bated breath, unsure of how this would unfold. As the flight attendants conferred behind the scenes, Amanda Harrison felt the full weight of the growing situation. The eyes of the cabin were on her now, judging her. The subtle whispers around her were impossible to ignore. She had been a woman in control all her life, but now, for the first time, she found herself vulnerable. Sophia, meanwhile, sat still. Her back was straight, her hands lightly gripping the armrests. Her breathing was steady. Despite the words Amanda had thrown at her, the insults, the dismissive tone, Sophia's sense of calm was unshakable. She had been trained to handle moments like this, not just through her debate club training but also by her parents, who had instilled in her the power of composure in the face of adversity. Her phone buzzed again. Michael had already called for assistance. Through the network of connections he had built over the years, he had alerted airline security and made sure they were aware of the situation unfolding in first class. He knew that the moment he would step onto the plane, the dynamics would change. Jason returned to the area, this time with a more serious demeanor. His calmness masked the underlying tension. He approached Amanda first, who had clearly been shaken by the events. "Ma'am, we've reviewed the seating arrangements, and this appears to be a misunderstanding," Jason said. Amanda's eyes narrowed. "Misunderstanding? You expect me to believe that?" Jason took a deep breath. "This passenger has a valid boarding pass for this seat, and we've confirmed it." He glanced at Sophia, who remained calm. "I suggest we all de-escalate this situation. We want to make sure everyone is comfortable for the rest of the flight." Sophia's eyes met Jason's. "I just want to sit in my seat. This isn't about any of us, it's about doing what's right." As Jason tried to defuse the tension, Amanda's frustration grew. She was losing control of the situation, something that, as a corporate consultant, she was not accustomed to. She had expected things to go her way. The seat was hers by all rights. But now she found herself confronting a system that was not only unfamiliar but also uncomfortable. She had underestimated the strength of the young girl sitting across from her, and she had overlooked the power of a seemingly quiet resistance. Michael's next move was to prepare for the flight crew's next steps. As he approached the aircraft at the connecting gate, he could sense the change in the air. This wasn't just about a seat, it was about something much more. It was a fight for dignity and respect, and it had just become a defining moment for everyone involved. Sophia Williams sat in her seat, trying her best to remain calm. The airplane hummed softly as it soared through the clouds, but beneath the calm surface, a storm was brewing. After the earlier confrontation with Amanda Harrison, Sophia had hoped the situation would subside, that it would fade into the background of an ordinary flight. But it didn't. The whispers began almost immediately after the interaction, slowly swelling into an undercurrent of tension that pulsed throughout the first-class cabin. Sophia had become the unintentional focal point of a drama that she never wanted. The incident that started as a simple dispute over a seat had now taken on a much darker tone. She could feel the eyes of the other passengers on her, the judgment in their glances, some sympathetic, but others laced with irritation or curiosity. It was impossible to ignore. She looked out the window, focusing on the clouds outside, but it didn't stop the thoughts that kept racing through her mind. She had done nothing wrong. She had simply followed the rules. Yet, in the eyes of those around her, she had become something more, a symbol of defiance, and to some, a target. As the plane continued to cruise at its altitude, the tension in the cabin seemed to intensify. Sophia sat up straighter, trying to ignore the uncomfortable stares. She didn't want to cause a scene. She didn't want to be the center of attention, but it seemed like the more she tried to shrink into herself, the more it became impossible to escape. Then, without warning, Tiffany, the flight attendant who had previously made the situation worse, walked past her seat. As she did, she leaned down slightly, her face a mask of forced professionalism, but her eyes carried an unmistakable message: contempt. She slipped a folded note into Sophia's hand, her fingers brushing against Sophia's for a brief moment. Sophia froze. Her heart skipped a beat as she looked at the note, confused and nervous. She opened it quickly, her pulse rising as she read the few lines scrawled in hurried handwriting. "You don't belong here. Stay quiet. If you cause any more trouble, I'll make sure you regret it." The words stung, the weight of them far heavier than any physical action could have been. Tiffany's message was clear: she was making Sophia aware that the power had shifted. It wasn't just about the seat anymore. This was about control, about who had the right to occupy certain spaces and who didn't. Tiffany was asserting her dominance, and now, she had crossed the line into intimidation. Sophia's hands trembled slightly as she crumpled the note into a ball, her anger simmering beneath her cool exterior. She could feel her face flush with frustration, but she took a deep breath, determined not to show any sign of weakness. The last thing she wanted was to give Tiffany or anyone else the satisfaction of seeing her flinch. She had learned long ago that reacting emotionally in the face of adversity often gave others the power they sought. As she stuffed the note into her bag, Sophia noticed out of the corner of her eye that a few passengers were watching her closely, their gazes flickering with judgment. One of them, a man sitting a few rows ahead of her, shook his head slightly, his lips pressed into a thin line. He muttered something under his breath, something that Sophia couldn't quite catch, but the tone was unmistakable: disapproval. She could feel the weight of his gaze as it lingered on her, the silent condemnation making her feel like an outsider in a space that was supposed to be a neutral zone. The murmur of whispers increased, and it was no longer confined to just a few people. More and more passengers were engaging in quiet conversations, eyes darting between her and the flight attendants. It was like a slow-moving wildfire, the tension growing with each passing minute. Sophia kept her head down, but she couldn't escape the feeling that she was being judged by every person around her. They weren't seeing her as a student on her way to a competition, they saw a teenager who didn't belong in first class, someone who had disrupted the status quo. As if on cue, the plane began to shake. The turbulence came suddenly, the aircraft lurching in the air, jolting the passengers in their seats. The seatbelt sign flickered on, and the flight attendants quickly moved down the aisles, assisting those who needed reassurance or more security. The shaky movement of the plane only amplified the tension in the cabin. Some passengers gripped their armrests, eyes wide with concern. Others remained calm, trying to look unaffected, but the unease was palpable. Sophia tried to steady her breath, but the turbulence seemed to intensify the already charged atmosphere. Her grip tightened on her seat as the plane swayed in the air. She could feel her heartbeat quicken, the anxiety gnawing at her, not from the turbulence, but from the awareness that her presence had become a point of conflict. The atmosphere shifted again as the conversation from across the aisle became louder. The man who had earlier been observing Sophia now began speaking more audibly, his voice carrying an edge of frustration. "Why is she even here? What's a kid like that doing in first class?" he muttered to the woman next to him, his voice rising just enough for Sophia to hear. The woman responded in a quieter, but equally critical tone. "I don't know, but it's clearly causing trouble. She should know her place. Sophia felt a wave of humiliation wash over her, her face burning with the sting of their words. They weren't even trying to hide their disdain. She had become the subject of their casual racism, the target of their judgment simply for existing in a space they felt was reserved for people like Amanda Harrison, people with privilege and wealth. And then, as if the moment wasn't already loaded enough, the situation took another turn. A passenger, apparently fed up with the tension, raised his voice. "This is ridiculous," he shouted, standing up abruptly, his seatbelt still fastened. "Why don't you just let the kid have her seat and be done with it?" The outburst caught everyone's attention. The murmurs died down for a moment as eyes turned toward the man. His face was flushed with frustration, and he gestured toward Sophia as if she were the symbol of the injustice. The flight attendants moved quickly toward him, attempting to calm him down, but his voice continued to rise. "She's just sitting there minding her business," the man continued. "And you're all making a scene over nothing." Tiffany, now visibly agitated, stepped in front of the man, her posture stiff and unyielding. "Sir, please return to your seat," she said sharply. "We're handling the situation." But the damage had been done. The passengers who had been silently observing now had their own opinions. Some nodded in agreement with the man, others exchanged uncomfortable glances, but all of them felt the shift. Sophia wasn't just a teenager sitting in the wrong seat anymore. She had become the embodiment of everything that was wrong with the system. The conversation had moved from being about a seat to being about race, about privilege, and about who deserved to be in the right places. As the turbulence continued, the man's words continued to reverberate in the air, fueling the unrest. The undercurrent of hostility was no longer a quiet whisper, it was a loud, divisive force. But it wasn't just the passengers who were becoming uneasy. Tiffany, sensing the shifting tide, now stood at the front of the cabin, watching Sophia with a mixture of contempt and frustration. The flight attendants were trying to regain control of the situation, but their presence only added to the already tense atmosphere. And then, just as Sophia thought things couldn't get worse, a new problem arose. The plane jolted once more, sending a few of the unsecured bags sliding across the aisle. A small suitcase hit the side of the aisle, just grazing Sophia's foot. The moment was captured on a passenger's phone. In the chaos of the turbulence and the already heightened emotions, the edited video went viral within minutes. A brief clip of the suitcase grazing Sophia was taken out of context, turned into a sensationalized moment that made it look as though she had caused the disturbance. What had started as a misunderstanding had now become a viral narrative that painted Sophia as the aggressor. Sophia's heart sank as her phone buzzed again, and she saw the growing comments and shares. The edited video had already spread through social media, and the caption read, "Teenager causes chaos in first class, disrespectful and violent." The damage was done. The video had created a new version of reality, one where Sophia was no longer just a student trying to navigate a difficult situation, but a villain in a narrative she had no part in creating. As the turbulence settled and the plane smoothed out, the weight of the situation hit Sophia like a brick wall. She was no longer just dealing with a racist confrontation, she was now the target of an online smear campaign. Her reputation, her integrity, her dignity, everything had been torn down by a few seconds of video footage and a narrative that wasn't her own. Sophia leaned back in her seat, trying to collect herself. The flight attendants continued to move through the cabin, and passengers seemed to return to their seats, but Sophia knew nothing would be the same after this. She couldn't go back to the way things were before. The fight for her dignity had only just begun. And it was a fight she was determined to win. The days that followed Sophia's arrest were a blur of media frenzy, legal consultations, and mounting anxiety. What had started as a misunderstanding on a plane had spiraled into a full-scale public spectacle. The viral video, edited to depict Sophia as the instigator of a violent incident, spread like wildfire across social media platforms. The caption, "Teenager causes chaos in first class, disrespectful and violent, was everywhere. The video was shared, commented on, and dissected by millions, each person contributing to the narrative that Sophia had no part in creating. At the heart of this storm was Sophia Williams, a 16-year-old student who had always prided herself on being composed and well-mannered, even in the face of adversity. But this time, the weight of the public's opinion was too much. The scrutiny, the judgment, the words from strangers, it all felt suffocating. Sophia had always known that being black in spaces where she was the minority would present challenges, but she had never imagined something like this. She was now trapped in a narrative that misrepresented her, leaving her no room to explain, to defend herself, or to reclaim her dignity. Her university, which had long celebrated her academic achievements and extracurricular successes, had turned its back on her. In the wake of the viral video, the institution swiftly suspended her pending an investigation. They succumbed to the pressure of the media, caving to the fear that continuing to support Sophia might be seen as endorsing the controversial behavior captured in the video. The suspension wasn't a decision based on facts or an understanding of Sophia's character, but rather a reaction to the public outcry that followed the online backlash. Her university, once a symbol of accomplishment, now seemed like yet another institution that had failed her when it mattered most. Sophia was devastated. She had worked tirelessly for everything she had achieved. Late nights studying, hours spent in various extracurriculars, years of hard work that had culminated in her being recognized as a leader in her school and community. All of it now seemed irrelevant. She was no longer seen as a dedicated student or a promising young leader, she was just a black teenager involved in an incident that people believed was her fault. At home, the tension between Sophia and her family mounted. Jordan, her older brother, had always been her protector, the one who encouraged her to stand tall in the face of adversity. But this time, even his resolve was beginning to falter. They spent their evenings combing through the comments on social media, reading messages from people who criticized her, calling her names, or worse, threatening her. Jordan, typically composed and strong, found himself struggling to cope with the anger and frustration boiling inside him. The legal pressures were mounting, too. He and his mother, Denise, had to fight tooth and nail to clear Sophia's name, while trying to keep her grounded emotionally, but it wasn't easy. Every day seemed to bring a new headline, a new scandal, a new piece of misinformation. Sophia's thoughts were consumed by the consequences of that one moment. How could a simple misunderstanding on a plane have escalated so quickly? How had her life changed so radically, so suddenly? The weight of public disgrace was heavy, and it gnawed at her, eroding her confidence. She no longer felt safe in her own skin. It wasn't just the accusations of violence that haunted her, it was the lingering suspicion from those who believed the narrative painted by the media. She had been vilified, reduced to a caricature, and no one seemed to care that the true story had been buried under a mountain of misinformation. The stress was taking its toll on the entire Williams family. Sophia's parents, Michael and Denise, had always been pillars of strength for their children, but even they felt the pressure. Michael, a senior FBI counterterrorism agent, had always been able to handle high-stress situations, but this was personal. The idea that his daughter could be so unjustly vilified struck at the core of his professional identity. He was used to protecting others, but now he found himself fighting to protect his own family from the very system that was supposed to uphold justice. Denise, on the other hand, was overwhelmed by a different kind of anxiety. As a mother, she couldn't stand seeing her daughter suffer, especially when Sophia had done nothing to deserve the cruel treatment she was enduring. But Denise also understood the systemic forces at play. She had seen it before, how the world treated her daughter differently, how black people were often expected to prove their worth in spaces where they should belong without question. It broke Denise's heart to see her daughter's dreams and hard work jeopardized by an unjust system that was quick to condemn. Together, they navigated the increasingly complicated legal landscape, trying to hire the best lawyers and advocating for Sophia's rights. But every conversation, every document signed, every meeting felt like a reminder of just how broken the system was. Their hope that justice would prevail began to dim with each passing day. The system that was supposed to protect them instead seemed to be working against them. As the weeks went on, the media circus only grew louder. News outlets continued to report on the incident, often focusing on Sophia's arrest and the viral video, without giving proper attention to the context or the truth. The narrative of the violent teenager spread quickly, becoming the public's reality, even though it was far from the truth. The more people talked about it, the more the story transformed into a grotesque version of the reality that Sophia and her family had experienced. The media treated Sophia's humiliation like a form of entertainment, sensationalizing every detail to draw in viewers. For the Williams family, this was a nightmare that seemed to have no end. The pressure from the corporate world added another layer of complexity. As a corporate consultant, Amanda Harrison, the woman responsible for initiating the confrontation on the plane, was a high-powered executive with connections that reached into various industries. Sophia and her family knew that taking legal action would be a battle against not just the media and public opinion, but the corporate powers that Amanda represented. They couldn't ignore the fact that the woman who had caused all of this had significant influence in the corporate world, and the system had a tendency to protect its own. Despite all the challenges they faced, Sophia and her family refused to back down. They knew that their fight wasn't just about one incident on a plane, it was about exposing the systemic racism that still permeated every corner of society. It was about standing up for what was right, even when the world seemed determined to tear them down. Michael, Denise, and Jordan stood by Sophia, unwavering in their belief that justice would ultimately prevail. But even as they fought back, the psychological toll of the situation was beginning to break them. They were mentally and emotionally drained. Sophia felt like a shadow of the person she had once been. She could no longer see a clear path to redemption, and every victory seemed overshadowed by the constant weight of public opinion. It wasn't just about clearing her name, it was about reclaiming her life from the clutches of a society that had already decided who she was. The tension continued to grow. With the mounting pressure from the media, the legal battles, and the corporate world's complicity in perpetuating the system, it was unclear where the Williams family's fight would lead. But one thing was certain. They weren't giving up. Despite everything, they were determined to take back their dignity, to reclaim their story, and to fight for justice no matter how long it took. Sophia's journey was just beginning. The battle ahead was long, but it was one she knew she couldn't face alone. With her family by her side, Sophia was ready to stand up for herself, and for everyone who had ever been silenced by a system that didn't care. The fallout was far from over, but the Williams family was prepared for whatever came next. As the days passed, the emotional and legal struggles for Sophia Williams continued to intensify. The viral video had ignited a firestorm, turning her life into a public spectacle. What initially seemed like an isolated incident on a plane had spiraled into a nightmare, and Sophia found herself not only fighting to clear her name but also battling the insidious forces behind the smear campaign. At the heart of the controversy was not just a flight attendant's bias, but a much larger conspiracy orchestrated by Victor Hale, the CEO of the airline. Victor Hale, with his polished corporate persona and untouchable status in the business world, had always operated behind the scenes, pulling strings to keep his empire intact. He was a man whose wealth and influence had allowed him to manipulate people and situations to his benefit. But now, his calculated actions were becoming increasingly difficult to conceal. Sophia and her brother, Jordan, had slowly begun to piece together the troubling details of Hale's involvement in the attack on her character. The first sign of a deeper conspiracy came when Jordan, using his connections from his law enforcement background, uncovered a series of suspicious communications between Hale and several members of the airline's leadership. These emails, exchanged in the hours following Sophia's arrest, revealed a coordinated effort to manipulate evidence and spin the narrative in their favor. Hale, aware of the growing public scrutiny, had ordered his subordinates to redact key footage from the security cameras, which could have exonerated Sophia. The altered footage would portray her as the aggressor, casting her as the villain in a story that was far from the truth. As the revelations mounted, Sophia and Jordan worked together, carefully collecting the pieces of the puzzle. They discovered that Victor Hale had used his influence to silence key witnesses, including flight attendants who had originally sided with Sophia. Those who dared to speak out were either coerced into silence or threatened with retaliation, both personally and professionally. Hale's plan was simple: destroy Sophia's reputation and make her the face of a public scandal that would deflect attention from his company's shortcomings. The more they dug, the clearer it became that Hale's actions were part of a much larger strategy. He wasn't just trying to protect his employees, he was desperate to protect his brand and his bottom line. The airline was struggling with financial losses, and any negative publicity could cause irreparable damage to its reputation. In his mind, Sophia's arrest, even if unjust, was a small price to pay to shield the company from the looming threat of scandal. The exposure of these facts triggered a significant shift in public opinion. As details of the conspiracy spread, more and more people rallied behind Sophia, condemning not only Hale's actions but also the entire corporate structure that allowed such abuse to flourish unchecked. Social media platforms, which had once been filled with vitriol and accusations against Sophia, now became a battleground for supporters demanding justice. Hashtags like #JusticeForSophia and #ExposeVictorHale trended across the globe, signaling a tidal wave of support that no corporation could easily ignore. Amidst the mounting pressure, Victor Hale's once pristine image began to crack. The corporate leader who had carefully crafted an air of invulnerability was now fighting to keep his empire from crumbling. The media, once his ally, began to turn on him. News outlets that had previously turned a blind eye to his actions were now digging into his past, unearthing a series of questionable decisions that painted him in an unflattering light. But Hale, ever the manipulator, wasn't going down without a fight. He began deploying his public relations team to spin the narrative, trying to discredit the evidence Sophia and Jordan had uncovered. He pushed out statements that sought to undermine the credibility of Sophia's supporters, painting them as radicals intent on attacking the airline's reputation. He even attempted to discredit the video footage that had exposed his involvement, claiming it was doctored and that his company had no part in the scandal. Despite Hale's best efforts, the truth was slowly but surely coming to light. As more passengers came forward, recounting their own experiences on the flight and testifying to the unjust treatment of Sophia, the public began to see Hale for what he truly was: a man willing to destroy an innocent young woman's life to protect his own interests. The legal battles continued to intensify, and the walls of Hale's empire seemed to be crumbling under the weight of public outrage. Sophia's journey, however, was far from over. As the legal team worked tirelessly to expose every layer of Hale's conspiracy, the Williams family found themselves facing new challenges. With the support of their legal counsel and the growing number of witnesses willing to speak out, they prepared for the final phase of their battle against the corrupt system that had wronged them. But in the back of their minds, there was always the question: would Victor Hale ever be held accountable for the damage he had caused? And would the truth, no matter how much it had already been revealed, be enough to bring about real justice? The conspiracy orchestrated by Victor Hale was more than just a corporate cover-up. It was an elaborate scheme to protect his empire at all costs, even if it meant resorting to criminal measures. As Sophia and Jordan delved deeper into the rabbit hole, they uncovered the most shocking revelation yet: Hale had hired a hitman to eliminate Sophia. This revelation sent shockwaves through the Williams family. The realization that the man behind the entire plot was not just trying to ruin Sophia's reputation but was willing to go as far as having her killed left them reeling. It seemed impossible to fathom that someone so powerful, so untouchable, could orchestrate such a heinous act, but the evidence was undeniable. Through a series of intercepted communications and confidential sources, they pieced together the damning proof. Victor Hale had made a calculated decision. He knew that Sophia was a threat to his carefully curated image and his control over the airline. She had become the face of a growing movement that was exposing the flaws and injustices within his company, and he could not allow that. To him, Sophia represented a potential scandal too dangerous to ignore, so he turned to his network of unscrupulous individuals to take matters into their own hands. The hitman, hired through an intermediary, had been instructed to eliminate Sophia discreetly, making it look like an accident or natural cause of death. But the plan was foiled at the last minute, thanks to the vigilance of Jordan and the growing network of people who were fighting for justice. When they uncovered the hitman's identity and the details of the contract, it was clear that Hale had stopped at nothing to protect his interests. The conspiracy went far beyond a simple smear campaign. It was an attempt to silence someone who dared to challenge his authority. This revelation turned the tide completely in Sophia's favor. The public backlash against Victor Hale grew exponentially. The media, already turning on him for his role in orchestrating the smear campaign, now had a scandal of unimaginable proportions to report. Headlines exploded with the news that the CEO of a major airline had attempted to have an innocent teenager murdered to protect his reputation. Hale's empire, once seen as untouchable, was now teetering on the brink of collapse. With the evidence of the hitman plot in hand, Sophia and Jordan moved forward with their legal battle, pushing for criminal charges against Hale. They knew that the stakes had never been higher. It wasn't just about clearing Sophia's name anymore, it was about ensuring that Victor Hale paid for the crimes he had committed. The public's support for Sophia continued to grow. What had once been a movement fueled by outrage over racial injustice had now become a rallying cry for those who had been victims of corporate corruption and power abuse. Social media flooded with calls for Hale's resignation, and protesters gathered outside the airline's headquarters, demanding accountability. As the legal team prepared for the next phase of the trial, Sophia and Jordan knew that the battle was far from over. Hale's PR machine was still at work, attempting to manipulate the narrative and discredit the evidence that had been uncovered. But the Williams family had come too far to back down now. In the face of overwhelming odds, they were determined to see this through to the end. The revelations had shaken the foundations of Hale's empire, and with every new piece of evidence, the truth was becoming undeniable. Victor Hale's reign of manipulation and deceit was coming to an end. Part 10. The final confrontation. The final confrontation was inevitable. As the legal battle intensified and public support for Sophia grew, it became clear that the corporate empire Victor Hale had built was crumbling. He could no longer hide behind the mask of corporate diplomacy and influence. The evidence against him was too overwhelming, and the public outcry too strong. Sophia and her family had made it through the darkest days of their lives, and now they stood on the cusp of victory. But the journey was far from over. Hale's retaliatory tactics had not ceased, and despite his empire faltering, he was still a dangerous man with resources at his disposal. The final confrontation came in the form of a tense courtroom showdown. Hale's legal team, once confident in their ability to manipulate the situation, now found themselves on the defensive. The courtroom was filled with tension as the evidence piled up against him. Victor Hale, once the picture of corporate success, sat in the defendant's chair, his arrogance stripped away by the reality of his situation. Sophia, still bearing the emotional scars of the ordeal, stood tall. This was her moment to reclaim her dignity, to prove that no amount of power, no amount of manipulation, could silence her. She had faced the worst that the corporate world and the media had thrown at her, but she had survived. Now, she was ready to see it through to the end. After everything Sophia and her family had endured, the final confrontation loomed like a storm on the horizon. What had started as a personal conflict between a teenager and a corporate executive had escalated into a public spectacle, drawing in the attention of the media, social activists, and ultimately the law. Victor Hale, the CEO of the airline, had been unmasked for his role in orchestrating a campaign to ruin Sophia's life. Yet, despite the public outrage and legal pressures mounting against him, Hale's empire was not ready to fall without a fight. Sophia, now standing stronger than ever, felt the weight of the journey that had brought her here. It had been a long, painful road, full of sleepless nights and relentless battles in courtrooms and public spaces. But with each passing day, she became more determined to see this through. Her legal team, bolstered by new evidence, was preparing for the final showdown. It was time for the truth to come out, once and for all. In the courtroom, the air was thick with tension. The once cocky and confident Victor Hale, whose every move had been calculated to maintain control, now found himself in a defensive position. The evidence against him was overwhelming. From the manipulated footage to the damning communications that connected him to the conspiracy. And as if the legal battle wasn't enough, the public support for Sophia had only grown stronger. The viral video of her confrontation with Tiffany, the flight attendant, and the subsequent revelations about Hale's role in orchestrating the smear campaign had turned the tide. Sophia had become a symbol of resistance against corporate power and racism. Sophia sat in the courtroom, her parents beside her, her mind focused. They had all been through so much, and this was her moment of reckoning. As the trial progressed, she could feel the eyes of the public on her, the weight of their expectations heavy on her shoulders. But she stood tall, her heart firm with the knowledge that she was doing the right thing. Every moment of humiliation, every injustice she had suffered, had led her to this moment. Victor Hale, once the towering figure of the airline industry, now appeared smaller. His high-priced lawyers, who had once been confident in their ability to suppress the truth, were faltering. The evidence was undeniable, and the public was demanding justice. The more the trial unfolded, the more Hale's carefully constructed image crumbled. His previous tactics of manipulation and control could no longer shield him from the consequences of his actions. It wasn't just about the legal battle anymore, it was about something much bigger. The case had become a fight for respect, for dignity, and for the right to stand up against systemic racism and corporate greed. Sophia wasn't just fighting for her name, she was fighting for every person who had ever been overlooked or mistreated because of who they were. As the trial neared its climax, Tiffany, the flight attendant who had started this entire chain of events, was arrested. Her role in the conspiracy was revealed for all to see. She had been an instrument in Hale's plan, a willing participant in the effort to destroy Sophia's reputation. When she was escorted out of the courtroom in handcuffs, the room erupted in whispers. It was a significant moment, but the final blow had yet to come. The tension in the courtroom reached a boiling point as the defense presented their final arguments. Hale's lawyers tried one last time to discredit the evidence, attempting to cast doubt on the integrity of the witnesses. But it was clear to everyone that the truth was too powerful to be silenced. The jury deliberated for what seemed like hours, but the verdict was inevitable. When the jury returned with their decision, the courtroom held its collective breath. The foreperson stood and, with unwavering confidence, read the verdict. Victor Hale was guilty of orchestrating a conspiracy to defame Sophia Williams, and his actions had led to her wrongful arrest. The courtroom exploded in applause, and Sophia, her family, and her supporters all shared a collective moment of relief. It wasn't just a victory for Sophia, it was a victory for everyone who had ever been wronged by the powerful, for everyone who had been silenced. Victor Hale's empire, once built on manipulation and deceit, crumbled before the public's eyes. His resignation followed soon after the verdict was announced, and the airline was forced to address the systemic issues that had allowed such corruption to thrive. The truth had been exposed, and justice had been served. As Sophia and her family walked out of the courtroom, the weight of the ordeal began to lift. Sophia, once a victim of a corporate giant's cruelty, had become a symbol of resilience and strength. The final confrontation wasn't just about one victory, it was about the power of truth, the importance of standing up against injustice, and the unbreakable spirit of those who refuse to be silenced. In the end, the story wasn't just about Sophia's fight, it was about all of us. It was a reminder that, no matter how powerful the forces arrayed against us, the truth always finds a way to rise to the surface. And when it does, there is nothing more powerful than the courage of a single voice calling for justice. Hey everyone! If you found this story powerful and meaningful, please show your support by hitting the like button, subscribing to the channel, ringing the bell to never miss our thought-provoking content. Your support helps us continue sharing stories that inspire, educate, and challenge perspectives. Thank you for being part of this journey.